Good day and welcome to the third part of Chapter 2 of your Botany course, which deals with plant anatomy or the study of the internal structure of plants. Just to recap, in the first section that we did, we looked at individual cells and the structure of these cells. On the outside of the cell is the cell wall, which is characteristic of plant cells. It protects the internal structure of the cells. Inside the cells is the nucleus, which is the brain and carries the heritable traits of the plant. There's also the vacuole, which fills the cell and which provides turgor pressure and gets rid of waste materials in the cell. Then there's the cytoplasm that constitutes the different plastids, the chloroplasts, the chromoplasts, and the legoplasts. And then also the mitochondria, which provides energy to the cell. So cells are like individual Legos that make up a plant. Then we moved a little bit further and we started looking at tissue. And tissue is just cells that look similar, that has the same function, and that share cell walls between them. So the Lego blocks, it's just the different colors of Lego blocks together. We started off by looking at meristematic tissue, which is the growth tissue of a plant. It occurs only at the growth tips and in the cambium layer of plants. And then we moved further and we started looking at permanent tissue and also the simple permanent tissue. So just to recap, permanent tissue is all the cells produced by meristematic tissue which change into this permanent tissue. It is the largest part of the plant. The cells are well developed and properly shaped. They no longer divide, and the different tissue types is adapted to specific functions. So we looked at permanent tissue, then we started looking at simple permanent tissue, which includes the parenchyma, that is responsible for normal life processes like photosynthesis and constitutes the majority of a plant. Then we also looked at collenchyma, which is plant cells that are thickened in the corners on the cell walls, which provides mechanical reinforcement. And then lastly, we looked at sclerenchyma, where the cells have thickened cell walls throughout. The cell walls are thickened by lignin. And those cells also provide support to the plant. Today we will be looking at compound permanent tissue, which is just a combination of these three types of simple permanent tissue to provide tissue that performs a specific function. We will be looking at epidermal tissue, vascular tissue, and ground tissue. The first type of compound permanent tissue that we find is called epidermal tissue. And if you think about yourself, if I ask you what your epidermis is, you'll tell me that it is your skin. And it is the same with a plant. Epidermal tissue is like the skin of a plant. It is the outer protective layer of the plant. Very important, the epidermal tissue or the epidermis is only one cell layer thick. So if you look at this photo here, this is the plant, this is the outside of the atmosphere. So the epidermis is just this one single layer of cells on the outside of the organ. The same here, this one single layer of cells is the epidermal tissue or the epidermis. Sometimes you have outgrowths on the epidermis. If you look at this photo, this is just hairs that has got water on them. So things like hairs are outgrowths of epidermal tissue or the epidermis cells. Sometimes, especially in the drier areas, in the arid areas of the world, on the outside of the epidermis, there is a wax layer, which is called the cuticle. And if you look at this picture here, there's the single layer of epidermis cells. And on the outside, you can see the wax layer or the cuticle. If there's outgrowths in the epidermis and they are above the soil, their main function is for protection. Things like epidermis hairs on leaves protect those leaves against some environmental conditions. If the outgrowths are below the soil surface, they are mainly used for absorption, and those are called root hairs. The second type of compound permanent tissue that we find is called vascular tissue, and that is basically the tissue that transport water, sugars, and dissolved nutrients through the plant. So the water is absorbed by the roots and it needs to get to the stems and the leaves somehow, and that water is transported through vascular tissue or vascular bundles. And the same with sugars that is formed in the leaves through photosynthesis that needs to get to the root somehow. That movement is through the vascular tissue. It also provides mechanical support to the plant, and it is composed of xylem and phloem. Xylem is dead cells and phloem is living cells. We'll look at both of these just now. The vascular bundle, as I mentioned, consists of two parts, the xylem. The xylem is the part that transports the water and the minerals from the roots to the other parts of the plant. So xylem is responsible for the transport of water. It consists of wood vessels and tracheids. They basically look like pipes in a plant, especially in the trunks of trees. And that is the reason why we say it's also responsible for mechanical support, because these pipes help to keep the plant upright. The second part of vascular bundles or vascular tissue is the living part, which is called the phloem. And the phloem consists of sieve tubes and accompanying cell. Sieve tubes is like tubes in the plant, and the accompanying cells just support the sieve tube cells. And the function of phloem is to transport the sugars from the leaves to the other parts of the plant. So vascular bundles or vascular tissue consists of dead xylem cells and living phloem cells. Vascular bundles are referred to as either closed vascular bundles or open vascular bundles. And this is where the difference between monocotyledonous plants or grasses and dicotyledonous plants and trees come in. When we looked at meristematic tissue, I referred to the cambium layer in stems and roots, which provides secondary growth to the plant that causes stems and roots to grow in thickness. And that layer is only present in an open vascular bundle. It's open because it can still grow. Closed vascular bundles, like with the grasses for example, do not have the cambium layer there, which means that those stems and roots cannot grow in thickness. The cambium layer is between the phloem and the xylem in dicotyledonous plants, and it provides secondary growth. The last type of compound permanent tissue that we find is called ground tissue, and that is basically the rest of the plant that excludes the epidermal tissue and the vascular tissue. So it's the rest of the plant. So if you look at this picture, for example, of a stem, the single outer layer on the outside of the stem is the epidermal tissue, and these are vascular bundles, but the rest of the plant is composed out of ground tissue. The same here with the root. On the outside there is a single layer of epidermis, the vascular tissue in the center of the root here, and the rest of the plant here is ground tissue. And it consists of different types of simple permanent tissue like parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma.